All right, it is 6:30, so I think we'll go ahead and start. I'd like to welcome everybody to this second webinar. My name is Ellen Bruckner, and on behalf of the 9 provinces in the Episcopal Church, we welcome you to these webinars on preparing for General Convention. Let us pray. Just and merciful God, you speak through the prophets, challenging us to seek peace rooted in justice. Help us to hear your urgent call. Loving God, in Jesus, you change our lives for good, challenging us to work for reconciliation. Help us to see your way of truth and love. With us, God, your Holy Spirit moves us to action, challenging us to live the good news. Help us to respond wholeheartedly here and now, to say yes. Amen.
Amen.
These webinars are sponsored by the Provincial Leadership Conference. Please know this is being recorded, and it is also being interpreted for the Spanish-speaking participants. You will be getting a link to this recording and to the various materials that have been shared, and it will be to the Province One website where all of the material is being stored. The purpose of the webinars is to offer information and thoughts, especially in those areas of becoming beloved community. And this is for deputies mainly and for bishops as they prepare for General Convention in July. This is the second of 4 webinars, and we focus on evangelism in this webinar, and we're also looking at clergy formation and leadership in small congregations. The questions some of you have sent in ahead of time, and anybody that is listening may participate by putting a question in the chat box on the side, and we'll try to monitor those questions as they come up. We probably will not get to all the questions, but they'll be transferred over to a Facebook page, and we'll share that link at the end. And we also hope to have webinars following General Convention that may speak to some of your questions. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists for this webinar. Colin and Laurel Mathewson, up in the well, they're in my corner. I don't know where they are for everybody else. Colin serves North Park, which is in the San Diego, California area. He has a degree from Stanford in Urban Studies and from the School of Theology at Sewanee. He served as a campaign manager, community organizer, press assistant, executive assistant, foundation program officer, and as a volunteer in El Salvador. Laurel, following a graduation from Stanford with a degree in American Studies, attended also implications of landscape. She was a campus minister at UCSD and as an editorial assistant Sojourners. She serves with her husband as co-pastor of St. Luke's in North Park. Colin and Laurel are rearing 2 young children along with all these other things. So we welcome them as presenters. Unshackled in Salt Lake City. She's an award-winning, classically trained pastry chef and an Episcopal priest. And with nearly 30 years of culinary industry experience, Amiee has directed the opening and operations of pastry programs at several notable locations, like Firewood Restaurant, Zermatt Resort, and Talisker Club and Canyons. To support the work of transformation and reconciliation in the unshackled and flourish community, Amiee brings a holistic understanding of recovery and her passion for mentoring young culinarians. Tom O'Brien is a native New Yorker, and he served in the U.S. Navy before practicing corporate law in New York and Florida for 30 years. He received a BA from Notre Dame in 1964, an LLB from Yale Law School, and an MA in theology from St. Vincent de Paul Regional Seminary in Florida. He retired in 2001 and started teaching theology and scripture in a variety of venues in Southeast Florida. His service in the Episcopal Church is wide and varied, including diocesan and church-wide service, as well as his local congregation. Since 2015, Thomas served on the President of the House of Deputies Council of Advice, and he served as secretary to the interim body of the Task Force on Clergy Leadership Formation in Small Congregations. And Susan Snook, the Reverend Canon Susan Brown Snook, is canon for church growth and development in the Diocese of Oklahoma. Previously, she was a church planter and rector of the Episcopal Church of the Nativity in Scottsdale, Arizona. Serves as a member of the Episcopal Church Executive Council and chairs its local ministry and mission committee, which oversees church-wide evangelism ministries. With 4 other people, she helped create the Evangelism Charter for the church. She served as a 3-time deputy from Arizona and sponsored the 2015 legislation that established the Genesis Project on church planting and new missional initiatives. She's a leader of Acts 8 movement, which is a group that supports prayer and evangelism in the church. So those are your presenters today. We're beginning with 4 broad questions. From your experience in this area of evangelism, what church-wide resolution or responses need to be brought before General Convention? How do the proposed resolutions help shift us towards becoming beloved community? How are these focus issues and resolutions affected by the current draft of the 2020 questions in mind? We've asked the panelists to share for about 2 minutes, and Colin and Laurel are going to begin. Then we'll hear from Amiee, then Susan. You need to unmute yourself and start.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share our experience this evening with you. Colin and I were ordained 5 years ago and have served as co-pastors of St. Luke's for about 18 months. Our ministry is the recipient of a church planting grant. And while wonderful things have happened and are in the works at St. Luke's, we realize that our time has been short and many more surprises await. We hope to be able to update the church many years to come about what's happening. But we have great hope for the future of the church and have been witnessing this hope bear fruit here.
So St. Luke's was planted by a nearby Episcopal congregation in 1923 in a just forming suburb of San Diego called North Park. And they purchased a significant lot that almost 100 years later is nearly dead center in one of the city's hottest hipster neighborhoods. So that's a great example of the value of strategic land banking in new development areas. St. Luke's enjoyed its heyday as the baby boomers grew up and entered a gradual decline in the 80s and 90s. And then in the late 90s, a number of Sudanese refugees began arriving in San Diego, who were familiar with Anglican tradition and looked to the church for help getting settled into the community. So St. Luke's, not without struggle, opened its arms to these newcomers who over the following decades brought their extended families as well. So by the late 2000s, St. Luke's was majority Sudanese American and also had become a mission of the diocese because as a predominantly working class congregation, it could no longer afford a full-time priest. So several years of very part-time clergy leadership followed, but the congregation remained vital as it served as one of the few cultural centers for Sudanese Americans in the region.
We're going to actually share our slides here, so hopefully you start to see a picture pop up. Bishop James Mathis decided to take a chance on us and raised money to support our work at St. Luke's for 5 years through major donors and the diocesan budget. The church planting grant provided another crucial source of support to give us a stable platform to build from and the time to do it in. We each work 3/4 time combined for 1.5 FTE, and this is 6 times the clergy support than what the congregation that had been hovering just below 70 ASA for several years had known. Our 2017 ASA was 102, and our attendance over the past 4 months has been closer to 120.
So what's made this growth possible, besides the investment and time spent tending to the many possibilities of this place, is the graciousness and capability of our lay leadership, and the congregation's sense of potential closure, which in many ways was a near-death experience, created an openness to experimentation that has made possible a welcome environment for newcomers, most of whom have been our white neighbors and a growing group of newly arrived Congolese refugees. So what was a 90% Sudanese congregation 2 years ago is now closer to 60% Sudanese American, 25% white, and 15% Congolese American. So that's a lot of change, especially considering that the Congolese refugees speak Swahili, many of the older Sudanese Americans speak Arabic and English, and their kids are English dominant. As you can imagine, Sunday morning worship is beautiful and messy. The liturgy is in English with a gospel proclamation in Arabic, a Swahili interpreter for the sermon and announcements, and songs in Swahili, Arabic, and English.
And while Colin and I love and are fed by the Eucharist and communal worship, we also wanted to experiment with new forms of being church that might be compelling to millennials who had little experience with this kind of church. To that end, a VTS graduate and lay formation director at the Cathedral, David Tremaine, started a young adult mentoring program that in its 2nd year is evolving into one of our first weekly small group opportunities at St. Luke's. It's been lovely and surprising to watch this small community develop and grow, and I've been struck by what participants are getting out of it and how the experience is keeping them engaged in the role that God is playing in their lives, even as they aren't tending to come to Sunday worship more than they did previously. They come about once a month or so. And that feels all right to me, particularly because the structure of these small groups meetings is Eucharistic in nature and form, and these young adults are growing in their faith. In fact, we're ready to invest even more of our attention and time into small group development as our chief means of pastoral care, Christian formation, and lay leadership development at St. Luke's.
The book that most helped us in our thinking in this regard was The Church in Many Houses by Steve Cordell. It comes from a non-denominational and somewhat conservative evangelical worldview that may require some on-the-spot translation to your particular context, but the core invitation is great. It introduces the reader to the concept of the cell group, which is an open, ongoing small group that is intentional in its leadership development and evangelical outlook, and the design and hope is that groups are self-multiplying. These groups become one wing of what it means to be church together, the other wing being Sunday worship. Small groups reinforce Sunday worship by creating a space for participants to reflect on last Sunday's sermon and its Bible readings. We believe these smaller group spaces can serve as a more natural come with me invitation than a visit to a Sunday morning worship, especially given that traditional Eucharistic liturgy can strike an unchurched person or someone unfamiliar with structured liturgical worship as quite unintelligible. We're planning to launch small groups in Arabic and Swahili soon too.
And because we didn't want the fundamentally working class identity of St. Luke's to change, or at least we didn't see that as the problem that needed to be fixed, we realized that we would need to maximize the use of the property gifted to us from previous generations to generate a rental income stream to supplement our pledge and plate giving. This has led us into a series of community partnerships that have been mutual blessings and mutually beneficial for those who aren't religious. A faith-based homeless services nonprofit works out of the space below our office, making us the center of North Park's population of those experiencing homelessness. And they pay us rent. So we also invited a Nazarene church plant to worship in our sanctuary between our 2 services. Besides paying rent, they've also updated our sound system and built a beautiful playground in our courtyard. And we're slowly starting to work together on joint youth programming too. Finally, we've partnered with the International Rescue Committee to run a youth urban farming program on our vacant adjacent lot, and are raising money for a commercial kitchen upgrade that will bring in the refugee women's culinary arts job training program. Anything around food and farming is especially alluring to those neighborhood millennials that we're interested in sharing a coffee or beer with, and our garden has made possible a very good number of such conversations.
So thank you again for this opportunity to share that with you tonight. We're deeply grateful for the church planting grant we've received that helped extend the initial subsidized run of our planting and redevelopment work to 5 years, which we believe is a minimum amount of time a diocese needs to give leaders in this work to find a financially sustainable path forward. We've made a copy of this presentation, our identity documents, and our small group liturgical structure available for your use on the Providence One website. And blessings to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel and Colin. I appreciate that.
Ellen is obviously having some audio difficulties. Ellen, I think you need to unmute your telephone and mute your computer audio so that we can hear you.
The
telephone is, wait a sec, let me see.
I'm going to turn off my phone. Can you hear me? Oh. Okay. Is that working now? Can you hear me, Amiee? All right, Amiee, it's your turn to present, and if you will unmute yourself, then we'll hear from what you... There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So a little bit about Flourish. Flourish Bakery is the social enterprise of Unshackled, which is a 501c3 charitable status nonprofit not incorporated with the church. We're completely independent. While I am an Episcopal priest and also a pastry chef, I've brought both of these together with 5 other individuals over 5 years of discernment to produce what is actually a call to reconciliation and social justice that fulfills our call as a church. We incorporated separately from the church, so that it didn't seem that the church was really quite ready to be involved in what we were doing, and we still hold that door open and look forward to the diocese and larger community continuing to become more and more involved. What that has done for us as a 501c3 charitable status nonprofit is that it has allowed us to partner with a variety of community partners, not specifically just the church. The bishop here, Bishop Hayashi, in the Diocese of Utah, Salt Lake City, just called me yesterday asking if he could introduce our concept to the LDS Church, which is the dominant faith practice here in Utah, if you didn't know that already. So with great glee, I really encouraged him to go forth. We have several individuals who work for us, who are on our board, who are volunteers, and participate with our program of training and opportunity, who are LDS. So it's a perfect pairing. We are completely philanthropically funded. No federal grants or any other institutional grants have been applied for or asked for at this point in time. We would love to see the Diocese of Utah come forth with the grant so that we could partner with larger Episcopal Church funds to continue our support. Right now we're at a $1.5 million campaign to put forth our new building and expand our program. We're starting that out with a $750,000 campaign drive over the course of 2 months. So we're very aggressive. In doing so, like I said, it allows us to partner with a wide variety of individuals, which is one of the beautiful parts of being reconciliation from the standpoint of the church, honestly. To answer some of the questions that you might have about Flourish. I'll describe the program quickly. I don't see the chat boxes. I'm joining you from my phone because my computer screen cracked yesterday, sadly. So if there's chat questions, please feel free to chime in and let me know what those might be. We are a year-long training program. The bakery is specifically a year-long training program, 12 months, of baking and pastry arts training for individuals from backgrounds of being either formerly incarcerated and or struggling with substance abuse recovery. And those are typically one and the same when you look at statistics across the board. We are seeking to reduce recidivism and relapse while also providing caring, hopeful, engaging community. This is a community that does things with and not for. It is not a charitable work. Although some might view it as such, it is a work of doing with. It's a co-creative. It's a being community together. It's not a power over, because honestly, charity keeps people enabled, as specifically individuals with backgrounds of substance use and incarceration, and keeps them sick and in relapse and recidivism cycle. So we look at the process of nonviolent atonement theology and an invitation to spiritual investment in our community. It achieves, I believe, the goals of our catechism as a Episcopal community. And in forming this, I studied several different communities across the country, one of those being Thistle Farms, run by Reverend Becca Stevens in Tennessee. We've also looked at communities that are of other ecumenical faith backgrounds. We could say we've looked at Homeboy Industries in LA, toured there and spoken with them about the program. Both of those communities are 20 to 30 years old in their success rates. And so when we've gone, we've not recreated the wheel. That is not the desire. We have looked at what skills and community people are available, done extensive networking. Like I said, it's been over 5 years of creating this project. It wasn't done by one person. It wasn't done by me. Some people think that might be the truth, but that's not the case. I just get the pleasure of sharing the vision of the community at large. So we really started with a mission-based approach, looking at what are we called to be in the community, where is the need. So we are that middle space. That bridge, that space between two seemingly dissimilar points on a binary, the us and them. And we look at bringing people into the middle together to recognize common humanity and the Christ in everyone. And we do that through volunteer programs. We do that through the fact that every day when we have bakers in the kitchen, in the bakery, we also have volunteers working alongside of them. I will tell you that as a chaplain and a priest, it's actually more chaplain and priestly work to guide the individuals who seemingly come from unaffected population than it does to work with individuals from backgrounds of recovery and incarceration. Because those individuals are already very aware of the transformation, what you might call salvation, that is happening in their lives. And individuals who believe that they don't have a problem are actually the ones most confronted with the awareness of what's really happening in transformation and what it might really mean to experience salvation in your life. So that's some of the things that we do. At the end of that 1 year, there is an externship placement in the community with community partners, resorts and restaurants, catering companies. So individuals are learning the real world and being supported by the program of Flourish. Flourish starts each day with a reflection that is owned and brought forth by the entire community at that table. I do not do to or for anyone at that table. I host space for them to experience their own spiritual journey and to make meaning of their lives and to see where God is working in them, where God is working in the world, and where transformation or salvation is happening in their life. Once a month, we take this out to a congregation in our diocese. If you're not familiar with the size of the Diocese of Utah, that is the entire state of Utah and northern Arizona. So it's a lot of territory to cover. We are located in Salt Lake City, and So this week, we're traveling down to Provo, which is about an hour south of us, to be at St. Mary's in Provo to share the vision with St. Mary's. I also serve a congregation, St. Luke's in Park City. That is my home parish. So I do that in addition to considerably more than full-time work already as a mission developer. In order to answer some of the questions that you put forth in this webinar, I'll tell you straight up, in looking at the resolutions, there isn't really an outline for the kind of work that Flourish does. There's not an outline of the work that Unshackled does as a community. So I would say it's missing. And we are being, as a social enterprise, the bakery, able to become self-supporting after we get off the ground and can hire as many bakers and train them as much as we need to be self-supporting as what you might term a congregation or a mission or a business. It is one of the most appealing pieces of us to a nonprofit community. So we will not be grant or philanthropic dependent for the rest of the existence. In fact, we'll be able to roll over grant and philanthropic funds to start yet another social enterprise underneath the umbrella of the Unshackled nonprofit status. So we are a missional congregation in a very unusual kind of a way. I would encourage the church to look at initiatives like this, where we are meeting the needs of a community. We're meeting the needs of a very specific community, which I believe is actually all of us, because I think everyone suffers from some form of numbing out or anesthetizing in our lives. It's not just bound to heroin or meth or alcohol. I think it's each and every single one of us suffers from some disconnection in our lives. And so that's what we seek to work with. We challenge the assumptions about how to share the gospel and with new cultures and new generations, which is exactly what this initiative with the church asks for. We're not asking anyone to purchase land. We already have that worked out for ourselves by being community partners with not only other faith traditions, but other businesses and restaurateurs and corporations within our community. So we really are a very central locus of activity, bridging all kinds of gaps or building all kinds of partnerships, which one might not expect to see with a mission and congregation. We are certainly willing to share and harvest the new learnings, and we certainly do lower the cost of failure for new ministries, considering how we're structured. I think it makes us very unique, makes us very desirable as a pattern. And what we really look to do in fulfilling this is to heal, just to heal culture, and to extend that arm beyond people needing to attend a church on a Sunday morning. Because while we do attend churches on Sunday mornings, we're also a space where people can drop in and visit and be with us throughout the week. We are out in the community, like last Sunday afternoon, we were out on a needle exchange cleanup and providing clean needles to those who are still using and suffering substance abuse in their lives. We show the belovedness to all God's children. We engage in practices of prayer every day. We look at articulating and expanding the story of God in the community. And I really honestly believe that everything that is explained in this charter is exactly what we touch on. It is exactly what we meet. We plant seeds of hope. We share stories of encounter and good news of resurrection, because that is exactly what recovery is about. It's about resurrection. It is about new life. There's no better story than the Easter story when it comes to resurrection community. And when it comes to recovery community, they are one and the same. And
I'm going to have to stop you here, so thank you.
Great, no problem. You can go to our website and find out more information about us if you like. No problem at all.
If you would list that in the chat, that would be great. Then everybody would see that link, and Julie will put it up also.
I will look to see if I can access the chat and do that.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks so much, Amiee.
Yes, you're welcome.
Susan.
Yes, ma'am. glad to be here, and that's really awesome to hear about the great things that all of you are doing. And so I have been a church planter, and I would love to tell you that story, but my subject tonight is actually to talk more about what the church-wide structure is doing to support evangelism initiatives. And we're doing it on a number of different levels. And so I'm going to go through some of the initiatives that we're doing, tell you what we've achieved so far, and some of the initiatives that are proposed for the coming triennium. So now I'm going to share a screen, and I hope you can see. Do you see it? Mm-hmm. All right. So this is a PowerPoint that just tells you a little bit about the evangelism initiatives that we are doing now in the church. So I don't really need to go over this slide with you because we all know the facts of Episcopal church decline over the past several decades, while the population has grown immensely. But the point of evangelism initiatives is not so much that we need to support our church. It really is that God has done amazing things for us in Jesus, and that is good news that we have to share. So evangelism is one of our top mission priorities, as we know. Presiding Bishop Curry ran for election as our chief evangelism officer, and so given that we wanted to become a church that was serious and joyful about proclaiming the good news of Christ, we had to figure out, what to do about evangelism that's more than just a word. What are we actually going to do on a church-wide level to enact that priority? So there are several initiatives that we've done. One is the Genesis Project, which is church planting and missional initiatives. It covers not only traditional church planting, but a number of very unusual and non-traditional kind of initiatives. And I'll highlight a couple of those for you as we go through. We have a new proposed congregational redevelopment project. We have Evangelism Matters conferences. We have the revivals that Bishop Curry has been highlighting. We have a program for evangelism grants, and we have social media and digital initiatives. And we also have evangelism with particular ethnic groups, which there's not particular legislation about those, but you'll see how those are interspersed throughout all the projects we do. And many of our evangelism initiatives actually do interact with our other priorities of racial reconciliation and creation care. Some of the people here are doing amazing, innovative work. So I'm going to start by talking about the church planting project, the Genesis Project, and just a little bit of information about what we have done to date in the last 2 triennia with this project. I gave you in your information in advance of this webinar some links to a detailed report on these initiatives and also a video that highlights it. So I won't go through this in a whole lot of detail, but I'll just say that as far as an evangelism strategy, we feel that starting new congregations of all types, traditional ones, very non-traditional ones, things that don't even look like churches, but things that are intended to do evangelism, is a very high priority for the church. This kind of local formation of community is the way that evangelism has been practiced by the church for 2,000 years. And also, if you look at St. Paul, who formed lots of small churches in different places, he stayed in touch with them and kept on supporting them with letters and training and support and encouragement, sometimes money, which is an important role that the church-wide structure can take. These new congregations, which may look like the churches we're used to, may look very different, are important to us because they reach out to new people, they can try new experiments, they're often highly motivated to do evangelism and community outreach. They can reach the kind of people that would not be reached by any existing Episcopal church, and they are exciting things for us to do for the kingdom of God. So, the Genesis Project the Genesis group is a group of leaders in church planting and missional initiatives that was formed to support these initiatives. And in the last triennium, 2013 to 15, We had $2 million worth of grant money to fund new church starts and mission enterprise zones. Mission enterprise zones are the more non-traditional kind of new churches. So we funded 13 new church starts. Those projects were given higher priority if they were for non-English dominant populations or non-dominant populations, fresh expressions type work, urban homeless, all kinds of interesting work. We also funded 25 mission enterprise zones. Those are very non-traditional kind of projects. They probably will never have land in a building, and they all do non-traditional kind of church work with populations that are underrepresented in the Episcopal Church. We funded in all 38 ministries in that triennium, and all but 5 of them are still in operation, which is a much higher success rate than studies show across all denominations, which means that our work of giving an initial jumpstart kind of funding and giving ministry support in different ways, training and support, has been very helpful in helping those ministries succeed. Just a note, a lot of ASA is not really a good number for a lot of these projects because they're not really necessarily Sunday attendance kind of projects, but of the ones we funded, they have combined ASA of 742. And then of the ones that are really not Sunday attendance kind of things, they have average combined weekly interactions of 998. So those projects are reaching a lot of people. This PowerPoint has a number of quotes from people that I hope you'll look at on your own. You do have a handout of this, and I'm not going to have time to read all these quotes, but I wanted you to see kind of the variety of projects we're funding. So here's a social service kind of ministry that a worshiper said, or somebody who took part in the ministry said, "My stomach is full, but I'm hungry for Jesus." So we are reaching people in many different ways. Grace Church Yukon is a more traditional church plant, but it's also reaching people who really would not be reached by any other church, especially in Oklahoma, where things are very conservative. Walking Together in Worcester, Mass. Is a community service agency. Here's a story about Laundry Love, which was also Monday, Thursday, and just a lovely story about how they took care of one of their people on that Monday, Thursday. In the current triennium, 2016 to 18, we had $3 million for church plants and missional initiatives. That's for grant money. The grant, again, is for a jump start for new projects. We expect to partner with the diocese, and we expect the congregation to be moving toward sustainability over time. There's also money for church planter training and resources, and for staffing and so forth. That kind of broad support across the church we have found is very important. And this slide just tells you about studies that explain that. The resolution in the 2015 General Convention created this Genesis group that provides training and support and coaching for church planters, and that's a very important part of the project. We have funded 21 new church starts, many different kinds of church starts, 22 mission enterprise zones and hybrid missional communities, which are non-traditional looking projects, discernment grants to help people figure out what God is calling them to do, and 10 renewal grants for ministries that were initially funded in the last triennium. All of those projects are still in operation. Some haven't launched yet. But of the new church starts, they have combined ASA of 917, and of the mission enterprise zones, combined unique weekly interactions of 1,350. So those are doing transformative work. And here again, I hope you'll go back and read these quotes that I don't have time really to go over, but they tell you about just the wide variety of amazing work that some of these projects are doing, some of it very non-traditional. So this is in regard to the question about the budget. In the current triennium's budget, we have $3 million for church planting and missional initiatives grants, $260,000 for church planting training and resources, and then a program budget to help the staff do their work. In the proposed budget, there's $2.6 million for church planting and missional initiatives grants, $200,000 for church planting training and resources, and $160,000 for program budget. That's a bit smaller, but I'm going to go back up. The reason that the church planting grants is smaller is because there's also $500,000 proposed for a congregational redevelopment project, which I'll talk about a little bit later. In proposed legislation, the Genesis Group proposed a very ambitious resolution to continue their work, but also increase the budget substantially. The church planting and missional initiatives grants would remain at $3 million, but the other items added there include a big amount of money, $1 million for bilingual and bicultural training. That's generally for Latino Hispanic ministries, which, as you all know, is a hugely growing area of the population. And then they're proposing $1.5 million for a land bank to purchase, to loan congregations money to purchase land. And they're asking the development office to raise $6 million for that work. The Congregational Redevelopment Project that I spoke about is intended to help up to 100 local congregations better engage their context. So this is a project with congregations that are located in areas where maybe at one time they matched demographically, but they don't anymore. The community has changed, and they need to figure out how to change themselves in order to reach the people who are now in their neighborhoods. So this is a project that we would share the funding with dioceses and local congregations. We would bring together a community of practice to help people do that. And we would be working closely, the church planting group would be working closely with the ethnic ministers and other folks to do that work. Other evangelism initiatives include the revivals. You've probably all seen them in the Episcopal News Service. A reasonably small amount of budget. The PB's office hosts these in partnership with local dioceses. The revival goals are to proclaim compassionate, generous Episcopal Christianity, share the good news of Christ in a way that matches the particular context, and so forth. Those goals that are listed there. The 815 evangelism team works with the local diocese to plan the revival, organize advanced prayer teams, train local evangelists to bring non-Episcopalians as well as Episcopalians. The presiding bishop preaches, others lead other parts of it. There is supposed to be follow-up and ongoing evangelism and mission engagement in the host diocese. So there are 8 for this triennium, 9 expected in the next triennium. Other things that are happening, the amazing Evangelism Matters conferences. There have been 2 so far, 870 participants. This is an initiative to train Episcopalians as evangelists for their local communities. And we are forming a network of Episcopal evangelists. I went to the last one, and the amazing thing for me was that I didn't know everybody anymore. I used to always know everybody in all the evangelism events, and now there are so many new, young, exciting leaders being brought up. The Episcopal Church is really changing, and it's an amazing thing to see.
Are you about finished?
I just have a couple more things.
All right.
We do have a small evangelism grants program to fund local initiatives, local and diocesan initiatives. I'm chairing the committee that's overseeing that, and we're seeing great work happening at the local level that will be shared church-wide. $100,000 budget proposal for that. Social media and digital evangelism. They are working on a curriculum to share the gospel in social media and other ways. There's information about that in the Blue Book. It's asking for some money to continue that work of developing the curriculum. And the evangelism charter for the church, I was one of the people who helped write this, and I know we're running out of time, so I won't go over it in detail. But this was an initiative of the Local Mission and Ministry Committee of Executive Council. And we look at evangelism as an interactive thing that involves 3 levels: evangelism of the church, where we need to become disciples ourselves and articulate our own faith stories; evangelism by the church, where we go out and listen to each other's stories and share our own stories with others; and then evangelism for the church, where the others that we reach, who may be very different from us, then change the church and evangelize us. So this resolution doesn't call for any budget. It simply commends the charter to the church, and the evangelism office at 815 is working on curriculum around these 3 areas. Other initiatives in evangelism are there on the screen, but I will stop there. So there we go.
Thank you. And I would remind people that they can always write something in the chat, and we'll try to address that, or Susan can address that as she reads the chat coming up. So if the big screen is on, if the PowerPoint is on, you can still type into the chat by using your little chat button down at the bottom. So thank you very much, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, we're going to shift a little bit and go to your task force.
Okay. There we go. Good evening. It's wonderful to hear the wonderful things that Colin and Laurel and Amiee and Susan are doing. And I'd like to describe for you a little bit of what the clergy, the Task Force on Clergy Formation in Small Congregations did over the course of the last triennium. Bring up the next slide, please. One of the things that we were authorized by Resolution A045 of the 2015 General Convention, and we were given a mandate to examine strengths and deficiencies in clergy and lay formation, to explore quality programs for formation that would expand the educational opportunities for clergy and laity and help with collaboration between diocesan schools and seminaries, and also for ecumenical consideration. So one of the things that we were directed to do was submit a plan for quality formation for clergy and adult laypersons that would be affordable, theologically reflective, and innovative. Next slide, please. Julie?
There she goes.
Okay, here we go. So the area, what we decided early on in our gatherings would be that we would focus on local formation and seminary formation as a both and, as opposed to an either or. And some of the research that we wanted to focus on was what kinds of qualities and skills are needed for clergy in small congregations. How can we deal with some of the special needs that persons of color and ethnic minorities have in becoming clergy, and for lay leadership training? What would we learn about discernment practices and commissions on ministry? And how can we deal with some of the cost of the formation, especially for bivocational and non-stipendiary clergy? So one of the things too, and a part of our aspect, was that small congregations, we realized what we defined them as those of having an ASA of less than 100, and that's 70% of the congregations in the Episcopal Church, including the missional congregations that we have been talking about tonight. So one of the things that the task force did is we conducted in-depth interviews with some 48 bishops, 38 canons of the ordinary, 31 chairs of commissions of ministry, 26 other formation leaders, and then followed up with a number of them in interviews. And what we found, which is the next slide, is that there really is a wealth of resources out there. The problem is that they're in silos. Diocese A may have some wonderful program, but nobody else knows about it. And so there's a real lack of awareness about these resources, and there is an enormous need for collaboration and sharing best practices. So one of the things that we really realized, that was very clear to us, was that good ministry would depend upon not only well-formed clergy, but also strong lay leaders who would be able to collaborate together. So the next slide, please. Again, one of the things is that we found that small congregation-specific training was needed, especially developing flexible approaches for vocational discernment. The silo effect of seminaries and standalone diocesan programs really worked against the collaboration and coordination that is needed within the Episcopal Church. So as a result of this, we have come up as a task force, we developed a series of resolutions that you'll find in your Blue Book. They are resolutions, the first group of resolutions are resolutions A022 to A026. And these are going to be combined into a single substitute resolution A022. And we've drafted this combined resolution, and we're continuing as a task force to refine it. But the important thing about, and the thrust of this resolution is that we really see a need for something we're calling a formation networking team. And this formation networking team would really work to break down the silos of information and share resources and best practices. It would include the training of discernment committees. It would include best practices for commissions on ministry and training commissions on ministry, including best practices for developing clergy and lay leaders, particularly in congregations with ethnic minorities and persons of color. So it ties in very closely with the kinds of needs that we see in small congregations, and also with the notions of racial reconciliation that are so important to us as a church. In the next slide, the second, some of the other functions of the formation networking team would be to do some curating of existing resources, and also the resources that are newly developed by various dioceses, so that these resources would be better shared and best practices could be shared. We, as part of our resolutions for the formation networking team, offer to work with the House of Bishops to assist bishops, most of whom we realize come from larger congregations. So they are not necessarily as sensitive to the needs of small congregations. Again, to assemble and make available a variety of effective models. This is not a top-down from on high, this is what you got to do. Instead, it is when inquiries come to the formation networking team, it's here are some of the alternatives that you might want to consider. And I think of some of the work that Amiee described of collaborating with others and developing programs that way. There was another resolution that is separate from the resolutions relating to the formation networking team, and that is resolution A027. In that resolution, we call for the Executive Council to develop a system, a scholarship system, for people who seek to have to get theological training and who will serve as bivocational or non-stipendiary clergy. One of the things that we really see as hopelessly unfair in our church is to ask people who seek to be ordained that they have to go through an expensive process of theological education, come out with substantial debt, and then are working in bivocational or non-stipendiary positions. So again, one of the things that we recognize that there really is scarce funding for non-traditional education and formation, that there's little remuneration ordinarily provided in these circumstances, and we did not want to have candidates incurring substantial debt in their formation process. How does this tie with evangelism, racial reconciliation, and leadership? Again, we really see that improving clergy and lay formation, particularly for people of color and ethnic minorities, and we had on our task force a number of representatives of different ethnic groups who raised this as a real issue by which persons are raised up in ethnic minorities different from, generally speaking, Anglo communities. That the small clergy need clergy that are evangelists and change agents and are mission focused, and that the desired leadership skills really include collaboration, networking, mentoring, teaching, empowering, evangelizing, inspiring. And so this really we saw as an important element to what the formation networking would be doing. We've gotten good support from the church leaders. We had a survey that was submitted to the House of Bishops when they met in Alaska, and so 47 of them responded that the initiatives that we had proposed really would be amazingly helpful to their particular diocese. We then had 6 90-minute Zoom conversations with some 48 bishops and Christian formation leaders in January and February, and we got very, very strong support from them. The major concern that we bump up against is that in our original resolutions, we had asked for $900,000 to be able to have a formation networking team. And we have recognized that in the current budget realities are such that this is not going to happen. So we have reduced our budget request to about $300,000. And our recognition here is that what we would have is relatively small stipends for the people who would serve on the formation networking team. We've reduced its size to about 4 or 5 people so that we would be able to accomplish this really on a shoestring of $100,000 a year. In terms of the funding, the places we are hoping to look towards it is that perhaps some of the $1.5 million that is there for unfunded but adopted resolutions, and perhaps some funds from the budget that currently exists for formation, for evangelism, because we really believe that this ties in closely and would be enormously supportive of the efforts of those desks within the Episcopal Church Center. Resolution A027 does not have a funding request. It would be that various entities that have funds available would pool them and would report to the Executive Council on this. So where do we go from here? As I mentioned to you, we are working on a substitute resolution A022 that would be then heard, we hope, by the Legislative Committee on Formation and Discipleship. To our knowledge, this has not yet been, those resolutions A022 to A026 have not yet been assigned, and our expectation is that A027 would be heard by the Legislative Committee on Ministry. So that's what our task force has been about. It's been a very hard-working group. It continues to work. We met again even just this past week on Monday to discuss aspects of the substitute resolution. And so we're looking forward to your thoughts that we have. I see there are some comments here in the margin. It's Tom. Should we want me to stop here, Ellen, or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can read the chat, and if there's something you need to answer, you can either type it in, or we're going to have some time for general questions now. So the first thing I would ask is the panelists, if you've heard anything from each other that you would like to comment on, that you would like to question before we start on some of these general questions. Is there anything that you heard that you'd like to make a comment about?
I can comment. I was struck by Amie's project and the beautiful things that she's doing, and she mentioned that she had not gotten a grant. I would like to say that we do have a number of non-grant receiving new projects that are still involved in the network. And so there is other kinds of support available in terms of training and being able to meet other planters or mission developers who are doing similar work. And if you would like to find out more about that, you could contact Tom Brackett or Mike Mickey in the 815 office if you'd like to get involved in those networks.
Anybody else?
I just comment again, one of the things that really encouraged me in listening to Amiee is the fact that she's sharing this ministry and how to accomplish it with other portions of within her diocese. And our real hope, if the formation networking team is adopted and approved by General Convention, is that programs like this would be something that our formation networking team could help other dioceses and congregations to be aware of. And the message that we got loud and clear as we talked to bishops, to commissions on ministry, to people involved in formation, was that there's good stuff out there. It's just nobody knows where it is and nobody knows how to get to it. And that's one of the things that we really see as essential in rectifying.
I'll just add onto that a similar part of how we understand our ministry. And I think a lot of church planters that we've been connected to through some of the trainings of Genesis is that we really understand a large part of our mission to be not just for the sake of this small community, although that we see that as vitally important, but for the broader church, that we hope to share things that don't work, things that where we've failed and learned from mistakes, and things that we've by God's grace have been surprisingly fruitful. So I think that that's something that I hope that the broader church understands when they see that number for church planting initiatives, or that it's like, oh, we're going to give money to these churches, and what about these churches that are struggling? Sometimes people feel that either or, and I hope that there is a sense from church planners and others who are doing missional experiments that this is for the sake of the whole church, and that we travel around the diocese as well, just speaking and answering questions and trying to learn from other congregations too.
Yeah, one of the important things to me is that these new church plants and missional initiatives are the R&D department for the church. So they can try experiments that more established churches are more reluctant to try, and other churches can learn from them and try new things. Mm-hmm. It's exciting.
I think just sort of practically, when one sees the amount of money in some of those resolutions, people begin to wonder, has that part of the budget already? Has it been planned for? And I think sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. So for deputies, figuring out what has already available and has been considered by program budget and finance is important to know, or is it just all new asking money? So I don't know if you can speak to any of that, or
yeah. So and my PowerPoint presentation spoke to some of that. So it talked about the current triennium's budget, the current proposed budget's amount, and also the amounts that other legislation have proposed above and beyond that. So for instance, for the church planting and missional initiatives, current triennium has $3 million for grants. The proposed budget proposed by council cuts that to $2.6 million, but adds a $500,000 congregational redevelopment project. The Genesis group proposed their own resolution that raises the total amount to $6 million, but that includes some new initiatives. It would still be $3 million for the church planting and so forth, the grants, but it adds $1.5 million for a land bank and another $1 million for bicultural, bilingual immersion kind of training. So it has some visionary initiatives that it proposes to add that are not currently in the budget. It also asks the development office to raise $6 million for these projects. And I saw somewhere someone asked if that was reasonable. Right. So the development office has not yet raised significant amounts of money. The hope is that these would be exciting projects that people would want to contribute to. Experience will tell.
Okay. There were a number of questions that were sent in earlier, and they asked about some practical issues or questions about how to do something. And I think that we will try to get a lot of those into the Facebook page where people can respond to it instead of here, because we're trying to deal with general convention resolutions. So my question would be for for people that are looking at these resolutions, and especially the ones in the evangelism or the development of this task force on, or the, Tom, what you were talking about, this network of formation, how practical is that for congregations? How are congregations gonna access, and I know it's a step from diocese, but how do congregations realize any benefit from those resolutions that you want to talk about?
Our thinking on this is that if the formation networking team is created, that it will have a email address and phone number that a person in a congregation, a rector, the person who's in charge of Christian education, could pick up the phone or shoot an email and say, we're here from Church XYZ, and we have the following need. Can you make recommendations to us as to what we might use? And again, one of the things too is that we're hoping that the people who will be part of the formation networking team will be plugged into the kinds of resources that you can find at Forma, Anglicans Online, other places like that. And that, I mean, again, it won't be instantaneously that formation networking team will have all the answers for everybody. But our thought is that by being able to direct not only dioceses and also congregations to be able to find the better resources for lay and clergy formation on a going forward basis. The other thing that we really emphasize here is that in terms of getting better clergy, it really seems to us, and the kinds of complaints that we heard were almost uniform, that the level of training for people serving on discernment committees and on commissions of ministries was very low. And as a result, the process became one of, does he or she seem like a nice person, as opposed to really helping to determine if these are the persons who have the qualities, skills, and spiritual development in order to be really effective clergy. So all of those fit in together, Ellen.
Okay. Other thoughts about how these resolutions and all of this, the work with the evangelism and the new church starts and the missional communities fits with congregations, even congregations that are now existing. Why would you vote for those resolutions on new church planting?
Well, again, Ellen, this is Tom. One of the things is that for us, that we really see the formation networking team as a both and, not an either or. That this is really there to support new church plantings, missional congregations, and congregations that, for demographic reasons, for any other reason, may need to be revitalized. And so we really see this as being across the board, and is not an either or kind of thing. I mean, both, as the budget indicates, there is a need to revitalize some of our congregations. There is a need for church plantings in many areas, especially ones that are areas that are growing. So it's a both and. It's not an either or.
Yeah, and go ahead, Colin.
Sure, you can go. I was just going to say, I agree with you, Susan, that these new church starts really can just add extra energy for a diocese. I hope that's part of what's happening in San Diego. We're not a huge diocese, but we're not too small either. And our hope is that it's something that the whole diocese can rally around and be excited about. Laurel preaches at different churches once every couple months or so, and just trying to share, some of what we're learning, and hopefully, share some of what, say, don't try to do either. So we're looking for ways to collaborate and think about new church structures that I think apply to any church. And especially, I just think any kind of church now needs to start thinking about what part of what they do has a church planting component to it. It's a particular kind of lens you put on an entrepreneurial approach to first thinking about your location and then how to speak the language of that location.
Yeah, and I would say the work that's being done is exciting and it's transformative. People's lives are being changed. And, you know, we know that the Episcopal Church is, demographically, it does not match the diversity of this country or of Province 9. We are not a representative church, and that means that we are not reaching the people that God is calling us to reach, the people who are in our communities. And so if we are seeing our churches die and yet we're surrounded by people that we're not reaching, then we need to find new ways of reaching those people. And it's because it's not because we don't want our church to die, because, you know, it's not about the church, it's about the gospel. We do this because there are people who need to hear the news that we have to tell. And there are people who need to hear that God loves them. They need to hear that in the way that the Episcopal Church tells that good news. They need to hear it in an inclusive, loving, compassionate way. We believe that our church has a lot to give to this world, and we are not called to hoard that treasure, but to share it. And so it's really the call of the gospel. It is the mission of the church to go out into the streets and talk to people and proclaim the gospel and help people be formed as disciples. And when I look at some of the projects we're doing, we are doing that in such amazing ways that don't look a whole lot like the churches that we've had for centuries. They look very different, and that's because the church and society are changing, and we need to find new ways of being the church. And that's what this project is all about. It's about transforming our church to go into a new world. The world is changing, and the church needs to find ways to reach the people who are there.
So, Susan, do you see then congregations who may be existing right now, vital, carrying on their work, can be of help to some of these new missional or mission enterprise projects or new church starts? It doesn't have to be an either or. They're not fighting for the same amount of for money that to be given in one place and not the other.
No.
How does that all fit together? How does an existing congregation help with this project?
There are a lot of ways, and I'm sure that the planters who are on this call can address that too. But
for everybody,
yeah. I mean, for instance, I talked to one planter in, I can't remember where he was, somewhere in the Northeast, and he was creating a missional community with homeless people who lived on the streets. In the snow and everything. And he could not do his work without all the surrounding congregations that would make dinner for his whole community on Sunday night. And these folks would come to worship, and then they would share in a dinner, and that was an integral part of it. So the surrounding congregations empowered and enabled this project to grow. I have a couple of congregations in my diocese where a large established congregation is, doing their bulletins and their administrative work and providing office space for the planter. There are all kinds of ways that established congregations can help and learn and grow and get excited about what's going on.
So what's in it for them?
I
would open that to anybody. Sorry.
Yeah, they get the excitement of watching God change lives. They get the excitement of having their own people involved in an exciting missional project. They see that their church also is doing the mission of the gospel in new and interesting ways, and they can learn new ways of worship, new ways of doing small group ministry like Colin and Laurel are doing. They can learn all kinds of things from these new projects.
I just want to, there's so many stories I could share about that kind of like established congregation, traditional congregations in partnership with us. But I'll just share one thing that the last 3 or 4 years, the St. Luke's congregation, the children and youth at St. Luke's have been involved with vacation Bible schools with other more established parishes. And, you say like, well, what's in it for, the Cathedral to host 25 kids from St. Luke's? Well, it changes everything for the whole camp and really makes it a transformative, beloved community of children from diverse backgrounds to be in that space and forming relationships across lines of prejudice and privilege. So to have, new church plants, or we don't have the capacity to run any sort of church camp, but we can go, it's enough effort to kind of get the children and youth of our community to these places that have the resources to offer such formation programs. And it really is a blessing for both communities. So I think that some of it's intangible and some of it's very tangible, but I think it can be invigorating and transformative for both places.
Do any of you, are any of you thinking about what might be challenges for evangelism as we approach General Convention and spend our time looking at all of the other things that come across through the Blue Book or ready to be voted on? What are the biggest challenges that this part of becoming beloved community is going to face? Because there's always choices that have to be made. What are the challenges that can you see any, or maybe there's not?
In my experience at the last two conventions, people are excited about the work, and the major question is always about the budget. So that will simply be an issue that comes up. The Executive Council, in preparing its proposed budget, had to do several iterations and did commit to doing this work basically at the same level that we're doing it now. So that's a good thing in my view. You'll see that the Genesis group provided is proposing quite a jump, and so that's a decision that convention will have to make. But the other evangelism initiatives, the revivals, the Evangelism Matters, the curricula that are being developed, the Evangelism Charter, I think people will, those are relatively minor budget items, and I don't think they'll be controversial. The question will be how we implement them in practice, and so how across the church after convention people take those things to heart and actually begin to learn from them and put them into practice.
Okay, I'm not seeing too many questions come up in the chat about what is going on at General Convention around evangelism. So I need to remind people that I think there's been some conversation here on what the Facebook page is, and that may be a place where people can continue to ask questions and get resources. So I'm not sure if anybody wants to respond to that. Julie, do you want to say anything, or?
What I have offered is I will look into why it is an event and not a page. What people have been able to do is to find it using the name of the page, which is Preparing for General Convention. And the link is on the Province One website, along with, I will add the name.
Okay. Hopefully, too, we will have some webinars following General Convention as we see what kinds of resolutions were passed and where the church is going. And we can have some maybe webinars that will go more deeply into evangelism, how to apply for those grants, all the different, there were some comments here on the chat about the distribution and the geographical distribution of the grants and so forth, which I think were answered if I read them quickly enough and carefully enough. But I think that those can come up in webinars, and we can make sure that that gets around to the whole church. And how do I apply for these? What do we need to do? So, anything else? I don't want to.
Somebody wrote a question. I would like to encourage us to consider ways we can be more inclusive in how we evangelize to and include people with different abilities and disabilities. Yeah, I would like to hear more about that. That's a very interesting question. And I think that we would be very open to hearing proposals and stories about that question.
One question that I just found in my notes was, why is the church planting budget so small?
Well, you're preaching to the choir there. Everything is a matter of balancing priorities, and so if you feel strongly about that, that is something to advocate for at convention. And I will say that the budget committee on executive council worked very hard to find the money that they did, and so that is appreciated.
And I'll just echo what Susan is saying. I mean, I served on PBNF for 5 years, and at the hearings at convention, PBNF does listen carefully to the testimony from persons who come before it to advocate why a given program or other activity is so important. And so if you feel strongly about it, sign up at convention to be able to testify as to the importance of that matter, because PBNF really does listen.
One of the things that I want to point out for folks is that this year's budget allows money in a fund for reserve for what has traditionally been unfunded mandates or for overages to what was originally funded. So it's really hopeful that the church is finally preparing to take advantage of the wisdom that comes from resolutions and from people on the floor to be able to have some money available instead of passing it without having money available. We have posted on the Province One website the proposed budget along with the explanation, and it would be helpful for those of you really interested in the funding questions to see where the money is and where there's money available to advocate for more for the things that you feel are important.
I think before we end, one of the questions that I did have, and it's a personal question for me, is those of you that have experienced these missional communities and new church starts and all of the different ways of being church, have you run across, or have you thought about, have you experienced pushback in that some of these things may not look like an Episcopal church at all? And then to go along with that, are there things that we need to maintain? And I just sometimes think that people think that we're going to lose something by looking at a whole lot of different ways of doing things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can speak to that in a couple different ways. One is that already I think sometimes our notions of what is Episcopalian are not necessarily even that tied sometimes to the Book of Common Prayer, but we have experienced something so often we think it is, right? So even the ways in which people play music is obviously an easy one to point to, but people come to St. Luke's and they say, oh my gosh, this is so different. I've never been to an Episcopal church like this. And I always want to say, we're doing a straight up right to liturgy. The only thing that's different is our music. And that's not, that's not something, or like, and we say the gospel in Arabic and our music's in different languages, but that's not actually not Episcopalian. It just feels very different. It changes the feeling of the worship. So I guess that's one thing I would say is like, if that is a problem, I hope it invites people to understand our tradition a little more deeply and to say, you know, this wasn't ever intended to look exactly the same across all different cultures and contexts. And so if it feels different, that's okay. There's still a core of the gospel and some of the wisdom of the tradition that's still there. Taking it a little further, our small group liturgies that are, you know, sort of, they follow the order for Eucharist, but you wouldn't experience it like a rite to liturgy. But we're still trusting there's a wisdom of that tradition there in terms of reflecting on the word together, praying together, sharing food together. So it's distilling it down further to the essentials. So yeah, some people might say that's not Episcopalian at all, but we're still trying to use the wisdom of the tradition and the common worship that we've inherited in a more flexible way. So we haven't personally had people kind of be upset about that, but I could imagine that could be a challenge for some people to see how those small group experiences are really, you know, Episcopalian in that sort of trademark way, I guess.
We have the kind of liturgy we're using for small groups as a handout on the Province One website if you want to check it out. It's still just kind of a draft.
Yeah. And I can answer that question with a story, which is actually reading one of the quotes that was in my PowerPoint. This is from Meredith Ward in Worcester, Mass. The ministry is called Walking Together. And her quote is, "This year, Maundy Thursday fell on a laundry love night. We washed feet, celebrated Eucharist, and had the great gift of a massage therapist who donated her time to give foot massages. One of our guests, who comes most months, lives in her truck with her husband who has dementia. One of the things we do for her is help keep track of her husband while she does laundry. He sometimes wanders away from the truck. When we offered her a foot massage, she was amazed. Afterwards, she said, 'That was the first time in 5 years that anyone took care of me.'" And I read that and I say, well, yeah, that didn't look like the Maundy Thursday service that I went to at the Cathedral this year. It didn't look like that, but it sure looked like what Jesus would be doing. And we're Christians. That is real service. It's real love. It's real proclamation of the gospel.
Okay, thank you. We've come to the end of the evening, to the end of this session. The next webinar is May 10, and we will focus on those resolutions that are coming out of the structure, the Standing Commission. I can never get it right. The Standing Commission on Constitution and Canons and Structure or Governance or something like that. It's a large one. So there will be resolutions from that and from the Task Force on Provinces. So we'll be doing a little more structure work, a little more, maybe some canonical, looking at canons a little bit on May 10th. I am so grateful to all of you who took the time to prepare and present for us tonight and to share your wisdom, your knowledge with all of us on the webinar. It's really kind of difficult, I think, when you can't see that there's all these people out there listening to you, but it was very, very informative, and we're very grateful. So thank you all very much for being with us and for sharing your stories. Any housekeeping, Julie, that I've forgotten? Check the Province One website.
We've mentioned it a couple of times. I just wanted to share the screen and show you what we're talking about. Here is the web page. You can see the URL is www.province1.org/general-convention. And if you go under the conventions link, you'll see General Convention to find this page. What we've done is we've collected a whole grouping of resources for folks related to General Convention in the hope that this can be your one-stop shop. And in the middle of the page is all of the links for the webinar series from the Provincial Leadership Conference. You will see, as on March 8th, where the recording is, I will be doing the same thing for tonight's and future ones, so you can find the link to that, as well as the Spanish translation for it. We also have all of the resources that the presenters have offered listed here on the page with links to them. And we will be doing that on a regular basis with all of the webinars. So please come back and look at this page often to find the things you need to be prepared for General Convention.
Okay. Any last word from anybody? If not, we'll say good night and we'll see you next month. Thank you again very much. Night.
Thank you, Ellen.